Story 1 Blood Roses. Delilah Renshaw had always loved Valentine's Day. As the owner of Petal and Thorn, a quaint flower shop nestled in a quiet town, she believed in romance, grand gestures, and the simple magic of fresh-cut roses. This year, like every other, her store was flooded with customers. Husbands rushing in for last-minute bouquets, teenagers nervously picking out their first Valentine's gift, and even the occasional single person buying themselves flowers just because. By the time the clock struck 8 p.m., Delilah was exhausted but content. She locked the register, flipped the store sign to closed, and stretched her aching back. It had been a long day, but it was all worth it. A single bouquet sat on the counter, 12 deep red roses wrapped in delicate white lace. She smiled. Orson, her boyfriend of 2 years, had sent them earlier with a handwritten note. Dinner at my place, 9 p.m., where something read, I love you. Orson Duvall was a quiet, intense man. He worked in real estate, spending his days selling overpriced homes to the town's wealthiest residents. Their relationship had started as a whirlwind romance. Gifts, candlelit dinners, and passionate declarations of love. But over time, something had shifted. Orson had grown possessive. He checked her phone, questioned her whereabouts, and became irrationally jealous of any man who so much as smiled at her. Still, Delilah brushed off her worries. Tonight was Valentine's Day, and she refused to let doubt creep in. She hurried home, showered, and slipped into a red dress, just as Orson had asked. She had no idea that by morning, her world would be shattered. Orson's house was perched on the edge of town, a sleek modern home that always felt a little too perfect, like a showroom rather than a place someone truly lived. Delilah arrived at 9 p.m. sharp, stepping inside to find the table set for two. Candles flickered, casting golden light across the room. A soft melody played from his record player. It was all incredibly romantic, yet something in the air felt off. Orson greeted her with a kiss on the cheek. You look beautiful, he murmured, pulling her close. She smiled, pushing aside the unease creeping up her spine. This is lovely, Orson. They ate in comfortable silence, sipping red wine and indulging in filet mignon that Orson had meticulously prepared. But as the meal went on, Delilah noticed something odd. Orson's hands trembled slightly as he cut his steak, his eyes darting toward her every few minutes. His usual confident demeanor was gone, replaced by something she couldn't quite place. Then, as she reached for her wineglass, Orson grabbed her wrist. Delilah, he said, his voice low and urgent. Tell me the truth. She froze. The truth about what? His grip tightened. I saw you today, laughing with that guy at the shop. Who was he? Her stomach dropped. She knew exactly who he meant. Elliot, a regular customer who had come in for a bouquet. They had chatted briefly about his dog, nothing more. Orson, he's just a customer, she said, forcing a smile. You have nothing to worry about. His jaw clenched. Don't lie to me. A chill ran down her spine. This wasn't love. This was something darker. She pulled her hand away and stood. I think I should go. Orson's eyes darkened. Sit down, Delilah. She took a step back. No. You're scaring me. His face twisted in pain, then rage. I do everything for you, he whispered, voice shaking. I love you more than anything. And you just toss me aside? For some stranger. Delilah's pulse pounded. Orson, please. Before she could finish, he lunged. Delilah barely had time to react before Orson grabbed her, shoving her against the dining table. Plates crashed to the floor. The wineglass shattered, staining the pristine white rug beneath them. Orson, stop! She screamed, struggling against his grip. But he was stronger. His fingers wrapped around her throat, squeezing, his breath ragged. I can't lose you, he choked out. I won't. Panic surged through Delilah. She clawed at his arms, gasping for air. Her vision blurred. Black spots danced in her eyes. Then instinct kicked in. With the last of her strength, she reached behind her, fingers closing around the broken wineglass. Without thinking, she drove it into Orson's side. He let out a strangled cry, stumbling back, clutching his bleeding torso. Gasping, Delilah scrambled to her feet, adrenaline coursing through her veins. Orson staggered, his face twisted in shock. You stabbed me?" he wheezed. Tears streamed down her face. "You were killing me, Orson." For a moment, he just stared at her, swaying slightly. Then, with a guttural groan, he collapsed to the floor. Delilah stood frozen, her breath ragged, the metallic scent of blood thick in the air. Then she grabbed her phone and dialed 911. The police arrived within minutes. Orson was still alive when they found him, but barely. Paramedics rushed him to the hospital, while officers questioned Delilah, their faces grim as they surveyed the scene. The shattered dishes, the blood-stained carpet, the broken illusion of love. Days later, as Delilah sat in the police station, the truth unraveled. Orson had been planning something that night. When officers searched his home, they found disturbing evidence. A small box hidden in his closet, containing a syringe filled with a sedative, a rope, and a handwritten letter. "If I can't have you, no one can." He had intended to make sure she never left. The realization sent a cold shiver down her spine. Had she not fought back, she wouldn't have walked out of that house alive. Orson survived his wounds but was charged with attempted murder. In court, he pleaded temporary insanity, claiming his love for Delilah had driven him to madness. But the judge saw through his manipulation. He was sentenced to 25 years in prison. As for Delilah, Valentine's Day would never be the same. She still ran Petal and Thorn, still arranged roses for hopeful lovers. But every year, on February 14th, she placed a single red rose in the window, a silent reminder of the night love nearly cost her life. Story 2. Deadly Devotion. Amira Calloway had never been lucky in love. She had spent most of her 20s watching her friends get engaged, married, and have kids, while her own relationships crumbled before they even began. So when she met Dorian Wexley on a dating app, it felt like fate. He was everything she had ever wanted. Charming, well-spoken, and thoughtful. He sent her flowers just because, remembered her favorite coffee order, and always texted goodnight. By their third date, she was completely smitten. Now, after 6 months of dating, Valentine's Day had arrived, and Dorian had something special planned. "Pack an overnight bag. Wear something nice, and trust me," his text read. Excitement bubbled in Amira's chest. No one had ever gone out of their way like this for her. She spent hours picking out the perfect dress. Deep blue satin with a slit up the side. Elegant but not over the top. At 7 p.m. sharp, Dorian picked her up in his sleek black sedan, grinning like a man who had a secret. "Ready for a night to remember?" he asked, kissing her on the cheek. She had no idea how true that would be. Dorian drove for over an hour, taking winding roads deep into the countryside. The farther they got from the city, the darker it became, the trees closing in around them like silent sentinels. "Where are we going?" Amira asked, laughing nervously. "You'll see," Dorian replied, eyes flicking toward her in the dim glow of the dashboard lights. "It's a surprise." Eventually, they arrived at a secluded cabin nestled between towering pines. It looked like something out of a romantic getaway ad, warm light spilling from the windows, smoke curling from the chimney, and a stone path leading to the front door. Amira stepped out of the car, shivering slightly in the cold. "This is beautiful," Dorian grinned. "I thought you'd like it." Inside, the cabin was even cozier. A fire crackled in the hearth. A table was set for two with candlelight dancing off the polished wood, and the scent of something rich and savory lingered in the air. "You cooked?" Amira asked, touched by the effort. "Of course," Dorian said, pulling out her chair. "Only the best for my girl." As they ate, he watched her closely, his gaze intense. "Amira," he said suddenly, "do you believe in soulmates?" She swallowed her bite of pasta. I think so." Dorian leaned forward, his fingers brushing hers. "Because I do. And I know you're mine." Her heart fluttered. No man had ever spoken to her like this before, with such conviction, such certainty. But as the night wore on, that certainty began to feel suffocating. After dinner, They curled up by the fire, sipping wine. Dorian held her close, his hand resting possessively on her hip. "You love me, right?" he murmured against her hair. Amira hesitated. The word love still felt too big, too soon. "I really care about you, Dorian." His grip tightened ever so slightly. "That's not the same thing." She pulled back to look at him. "Dorian, what's going on?" His expression darkened. "I just need to know you're mine." Completely. Amira's stomach twisted. "I care about you, but I think we should slow down." The words had barely left her lips when the shift happened. Dorian's warm, charming mask cracked, revealing something cold beneath. "You want to slow down?" His voice was eerily calm. "After everything I've done for you?" Amira's pulse spiked. "Dorian, He stood abruptly, knocking over his wine glass. Red liquid seeped into the carpet, a stark contrast to the beige fabric. "You don't get it," he muttered, pacing. "I've given you everything. I chose you, and you're just throwing it away." A cold sweat broke out on Amira's skin. "Dorian, you're scaring me." He stopped, his face unreadable. Then slowly he smiled. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "I didn't mean to frighten you." But something in his eyes told her this wasn't over. Later that night, Amira excused herself to the bathroom, her hands shaking as she locked the door. She needed to leave. Now, pulling out her phone, she checked the signal. No service. Of course, they were in the middle of nowhere. She cracked the door open, peeking into the dimly lit cabin. Dorian was sitting on the couch, staring into the fire. His posture was too still, too controlled. Heart pounding, Amira crept toward the front door, her breath shallow. She reached for the handle, a hand clamped around her wrist. "Going somewhere?" She spun around, terror clawing up her throat. "Dorian, please. You weren't even going to say goodbye?" His grip tightened, his expression unreadable. "That's not very kind, Amira." She yanked her arm free and bolted toward the bedroom, slamming the door behind her. She shoved a chair under the handle, her breath coming in gasps. Think. The window." She hurried to it, fumbling with the latch. Outside, the forest stretched into darkness, thick with trees. But she had no choice. She hoisted herself through, landing hard on the frozen ground. Pain shot through her ankle, but she pushed forward, running blindly into the woods. Behind her, the cabin door burst open. "Amira!" Her name echoed through the trees. She didn't stop. She ran until her lungs burned, until her legs threatened to give out. Then, headlights. A car was parked on the side of the road, an elderly man stepping out, eyes wide as he saw her. "Help me," she sobbed. The man didn't hesitate. He opened the car door, ushering her inside just as Dorian emerged from the woods, his face twisted in rage. "You don't understand," he shouted, pounding on the window. "She belongs with me." The car peeled away, leaving him screaming in the rearview mirror. The police found Dorian the next morning, wandering through the woods. What they discovered at the cabin was chilling. In a locked drawer, they found a collection of photos of Amira, taken without her knowledge. Receipts from private investigators. A journal filled with obsessive entries detailing every moment of their relationship. And worst of all, a handwritten note. "If she won't love me, she won't love anyone." Dorian was arrested and charged with stalking, unlawful imprisonment, and attempted harm. Amira never spoke to him again. She moved to a new city, changed her number, and deleted every dating app from her phone. Valentine's Day used to be her favorite holiday. Now, it was just the anniversary of the night she barely escaped with her life. Story 3. Love Me to Death. Leora Faye had never believed in grand romantic gestures. She wasn't the kind of woman who expected roses, candlelit dinners, or diamond bracelets. In fact, she found Valentine's Day a bit ridiculous. But this year was different. This year, she was in love. For the past 8 months, she had been dating Ronan Vale, a quiet, handsome man she had met at a bookstore. He wasn't flashy or over the top, but he was steady, kind, and deeply thoughtful. So when he surprised her with a weekend getaway at a luxury hotel for Valentine's Day, she was stunned. You really didn't have to do this, she said as they checked in. Ronan kissed her temple. I wanted to. The hotel was stunning. Polished marble floors, dim golden lighting, and a breathtaking view of the city skyline from their suite. A bottle of champagne was already chilling on the table, a handwritten note beside it. To my beautiful Leora, the love of my life. Here's to forever. She felt a warmth spread through her chest. Maybe, for once, she could allow herself to believe in romance. But by the next morning, everything would be shattered. That evening, they had dinner in the hotel's rooftop restaurant. The night was perfect. The soft hum of jazz music, the twinkling city lights, and the way Ronan looked at her like she was the only person in the world. After dinner, they returned to their suite. Leora excused herself to freshen up, heading into the lavish bathroom. She turned on the faucet, splashing cool water on her face. Then she looked up. For a split second, she swore she saw something move in the mirror's reflection. A shadow, right behind her. Her heart lurched as she spun around, but the bathroom was empty. She let out a shaky laugh. Get it together, Leora. She blamed it on the wine, the dim lighting, her overactive imagination. Shaking her head, she walked back into the room, where Ronan was pouring them each a glass of champagne. To us, he said, handing her a flute. She smiled, clinking her glass against his. But as she took a sip, a bitter aftertaste lingered on her tongue. Her vision swam. The room tilted. Ronan, I don't... She barely had time to process what was happening before everything went black. Leora woke up to darkness. Her body felt heavy, her head pounding as she struggled to move. The cold bite of metal burned against her wrists. She tried to pull her hands up, chains. Panic flooded her. She was sitting in a chair, her arms bound to the armrests, her ankles locked to the legs. The air smelled damp, metallic, like rust and something else. Something sickly sweet. She tried to scream, but her throat was dry, her voice barely a whisper. Then, footsteps. Ronan stepped into the dim glow of a single hanging light bulb. His face was calm, collected, like this was normal. Good morning, love. Leora's chest tightened. Ronan, what is this? He crouched in front of her, his hands resting gently on her knees, as if they were just having a casual conversation. I know this is a lot to take in, he said softly, but I need you to understand. I did this because I love you. A cold, paralyzing fear crept into her veins. This isn't love, she whispered. Ronan smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Oh, but it is. Then he stood up and walked over to a small table covered in neatly arranged tools. Scalpels, syringes, something that looked disturbingly like a bone saw. Leora's stomach turned. I wanted to wait until we were married, Ronan continued, his fingers trailing over the instruments. But you forced my hand. She struggled against the chains. What are you talking about? His jaw tensed. I saw you, Leora. Her mind raced. Saw me where? Doing what? Ronan turned to her, his expression unreadable. The barista at the coffee shop. You smiled at him. She blinked. What? Ronan's nostrils flared. I saw the way you looked at him. He picked up a scalpel, turning it between his fingers. You don't understand, do you? He let out a breath, shaking his head. You belong to me, and if I can't have you, no one can. Terror clawed at her throat. This wasn't Ronan. Or maybe it was, and she had just never seen the monster lurking beneath. She had to get out. Now. Leora's mind raced as Ronan paced the room, mumbling to himself. The chains around her wrists were tight, but not unbreakable. If she could just... Are you listening, love? Ronan turned, frowning. Leora forced herself to smile. Yes, she lied. Her fingers worked quickly, trying to find a weakness in the restraints. I was wrong. You're right. I shouldn't have smiled at him. Ronan's head tilted. You mean that? She nodded. You love me more than anyone ever has. His eyes softened, and for a moment, he almost looked like the man she had fallen for. I do. Slowly, she loosened the chain around her right wrist. She just needed him closer. Ronan, she whispered. Kiss me. His breath hitched. He stepped forward, cupping her face. And just as his lips brushed hers, she tore her hand free and slammed her elbow into his throat. Ronan choked, stumbling back. Leora ripped her other hand loose, then her ankles, and lunged for the scalpel on the table. He recovered quickly, grabbing her wrist. They struggled, the blade flashing between them. Then, with a guttural scream, she drove it into his side. Ronan gasped, his eyes wide with shock as he collapsed to his knees. Blood spread across his shirt, staining the floor beneath him. Leora didn't wait. She ran. Up the stairs, through the door, into the night. Barefoot, disoriented, and shaking, she sprinted down the dirt road leading away from the isolated cabin. A pair of headlights appeared in the distance. She threw herself in front of the car, waving frantically. The driver, an older woman, slammed the brakes. "Please," Leora sobbed. "Help me." The woman yanked open the door. "Get in, honey. Now." As the car sped away, Leora glanced over her shoulder. Ronan was standing in the doorway of the cabin, watching her. Bleeding, but still standing. The police found the cabin within hours. Inside, they discovered evidence of a plan. Ronan had been stalking Leora from the moment they met. He had detailed notes on her daily routine, past relationships, and even future plans. But the most chilling discovery? A wedding dress in her size. Leora never saw Ronan again. He vanished that night, leaving behind only bloodstains and nightmares. Every Valentine's Day since, she locks her doors, avoids restaurants, and sleeps with the lights on. Because somewhere out there, Ronan is still waiting, and she knows one day he'll come back to finish what he started.